Next up, we have Shaman. Shaman's been in a pretty decent spot actually since the mini set. So doesn't need the same sort of help we might have expected coming out of Forge and the Barons. But first card we have here is Tiny Toys. 6-cost spell, summon 4 random 5-cost minions, make them 2/2. So the obvious use of this is with any kind of evolve effect. Use this with Bogs by Knuckles. You can use this with Revolve to effectively get 4 5 drops or 4 6 drops or 6 mana. Even just with Revolve, right? You can just Revolve this and boom, you have 4 5 drops that aren't reduced to 2/2 for just 6 mana. And that obviously in a lot of matchups can be extremely powerful. So yeah, this is probably the sort of thing that a lot of people who are not fans of Evolve Shaman are like, oh god, it's back, it's back. This is much slower, right, than a lot of Evolve stuff we've seen in the past. This is no like Desert Hair, right? Like we're not getting this out incredibly quickly. There is still, of course, the threat of Lightning Bloom bringing this out, ahead of schedule. But if you're like Lightning Blooming, into this, it's at least, you're probably not going to also have the Knuckles in play yet. The sequence there of like Knuckles into Tiny Toys is at least difficult. So I do expect that the sort of deck that would be built around this would likely also have Revolve. I don't know how many other like minions there are, like in the form of like the Pit Fighter, Pit Master, whatever it is, that make more things that are understated, but you get multiples of them for their cost. So yeah, I think this is a card that is likely to at least casually revitalize the archetype. I think that Evolve is a sort of archetype that a lot of people competitively get really frustrated if it is good. My instinct is that it's unlikely to be that good, but again, as we've seen many times since the introduction of the core set, even like just this into Revolve, there's a lot fewer bad 5-cost minions, because there's a lot fewer bad minions in general, that are likely to give you, a sort of low roll here. And there's clearly a lot of very powerful things you could possibly high roll into. So, I do think that something to be cautious about for sure, and I'm certainly going to try it because Evolve Shaman's always been kind of a pet deck of mine. Next up we have Command the Elements. I like the picture here. Yes, the elements are mine. Even if this arm is not, it's gone, it's cut off. Oh no! Anyway, Command the Elements, questline, play 3 cards with Overload. This is kind of a weird one because play 3 cards with Overload, reward, unlock your overloaded mana crystals. It's like, okay, that's weird. But with the next step also being play more Overload cards. Well, that's actually the wrong order. I did it in the wrong order. No! Either way. This is the next one, then this, then this. You play 3, unlock your mana crystals. You play 3 more, you get a 3/3 elemental. You play 2 more, you get Stormcaller Brukan, who has Battlecry. For the rest of the game, your spells cast twice. So this is one of the more unusual quests because the sort of pattern of the rewards for them is very different, right? The pattern of rewards for a lot of them are like, here's this thing, with like the mage quest, right? It's like, oh, discover a spell, or draw a spell, discover a spell. This one is unlock your mana crystals, get a 3/3, which are just feel really discordant, but I think part of it is a lot of Overload cards are removal effects or like burn effects that don't necessarily like proactively advance your board. So something that does proactively advance your board in the form of the 3/3 elemental that like generates some sort of thing on the board and can help defend you can have some significant value there. Being able to continue to cast Overload cards is difficult if you're overloaded. So the first one, unlocking your overloaded mana crystals, is pretty interesting. And there's some really interesting sequencing with this. I actually did try experimenting with this. My early iterations were pretty bad and definitely needed a little bit of tuning. In particular, I think I had too many things that were hinging on playing Overload cards and not enough things that were actually either Overload cards themselves or generating Overload cards. That's one of the big things, right? The big payoff, like you really want to get this quest done, right? And to do that, you have to play 8 cards with Overload. That's a lot, right? So, worth noting, guidance works. It's because guidance actually triggers it if you choose the Overload option, which didn't used to be the case for things like Unbound Elemental, but now is. So obviously a card you want in your deck. Lightning Bloom is a very effective way to especially trigger the first one. You could Lightning Bloom for your 3rd spell, unlocking those 2 mana crystals, and then have all the extra mana to spend. Can be very powerful. So like as I was saying, there's a lot of interesting sequencing things based on kind of the nature of the rewards you get at each stage. especially the first one. Like how do you want to do this to ensure that you're getting the most out of your mana crystal unlock? You want to be like overloaded for the most that you can initially. The ultimate reward of Stormwind Brukan for the rest of the game, your spells cast twice. Having spells like Guidance that generate resources are especially powerful because hey, now you're generating a bunch of stuff twice, and now you have more things than double cast. Brukan with like Instructor Fireheart, everything that you cast is doubled, and you keep getting more of them. Boom, 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 all kinds of craziness. So yeah, I mean, I think that this is a pretty powerful quest. It is a interesting challenge both to build and to play the deck. I do think this is like less straightforward because the nature of the differing rewards at each stage than a lot of the other ones. A lot of them are just like, yep, do your thing, do your thing. And again, because a lot of the overload cards aren't necessarily just like, okay, you just play it, right? Like it's not like you're just like, I will play an overload minion, I will play an overload minion, I will play an overload minion. Great, unlock, I will play an overload minion, you know? A lot of them are like lightning bolt, right? Lightning bloom, serpent shrine portal, you know, guidance. There's all these things that kind of have a bunch of disparate effects, or are like, you know, not immediately like proactive in quite the same way. So figuring out how you want to actually use everything is a fun challenge. So I think this is a really cool quest. I'm definitely looking forward to experimenting with it, and the payoff certainly is exciting. You know, you get some real fireworks once you're double casting every spell. Next up, we have Bolner Hammerbeak. After you play a Battlecry minion, repeat the first Battlecry played this turn. Kind of like a Bran, except it's only the first thing, but you keep doing the first thing over and over again, right? It's not just the first thing. Not just the first Battlecry minion doubles, it's every time you play Battlecry minion, you repeat whatever the first Battlecry minion you played this turn. When I first read this, I was like, oh, it's like Bran, but it only works once. That's not what it is. Whenever you play a Battlecry minion, you repeat the first Battlecry you played. So, it can sometimes be better than Bran, right? Because you play like an expensive Battlecry minion, then you play like several cheap ones. You know, it's like, okay, I'll Fire Elemental you. Like, all right, well now I'll play, you know, Firefly. I'm just naming stuff. Like I'll play like, you know, Kindling Elemental. Each of those, not only Kindling Elementals, but also Fire Elementals. It's pretty sick. So there's a ton of battle cries in Shaman. You know, tons of elementals, tons of just like general stuff. So I'm pretty excited for this. I think this is a very, very cool card, and it's super open ended. You know, it's not like, you know, it's not something that like really naturally kind of pushes you in a certain direction. There's just so many cool things you can do with it, and I definitely think this is going to see play and can do some crazy, crazy things. Next up, we have Canal Slogger. It's a 4-cost, 6/4 Rush Lifesteal Elemental with Overload 1. This is kind of like just a ton of stuff, right? Like you're playing an Elemental deck, great. You might want this guy. You're playing an Overload deck, great. You might want this guy. You're playing a mid-range or control deck, great. You might want this guy because it's Rush Lifesteal and 6 power. Since Walking Fountain rotated, one of the things that like mid-range-ish Shaman decks have kind of struggled with is like they don't have life gain, right? Unless you're playing Tidal Surge or Tidal Wave, you don't really have any life gain in Shaman. Prior to this, there just weren't very many options. This is a ton of life gain connected to a very relevant body that, you know, can potentially like actually connect multiple times. If you're playing as like an aggressive deck, like say you're playing as Face Hunter, you know, you like Canal Slogger their guy, they may just have to attack it again and you just gain 12 life. It's just like pretty crazy, right? And you know, it is again an overload card and an elemental, so like it kind of has all the pieces of the buffalo to whichever synergy you're going, whichever direction you're going, it can fit into that deck. So this is, I think, possibly the card that is likely to see the most play from Shaman in this expansion, simply because it can go into such a wide variety of different Shaman decks and be very effective in all of them. Next up is Overdraft. 1-cost tradable spell. Unlock your overloaded mana crystals to deal that much damage. So this is a card that people were kind of going nuts about when it was revealed. I think this card does seem like it's potentially fairly powerful. I tried it actually in my Quest Shaman deck, and it was fairly disappointing there. In part because it just wasn't itself an overload card. So that's obviously like a specific place that it wouldn't necessarily fit. But like if you're playing overload Shaman that isn't a Quest deck, right? Say you're playing aggro overload Shaman with like with like Unbound Elemental, Earth Elemental, like a bunch of stuff like that. This, can I think be a pretty powerful card in that kind of deck. But I don't think it's necessarily something that wants to go in Quest because you just want so many of your spells to specifically be Overload cards. That said, maybe like just in a different mix of stuff. Maybe I had too many payoffs, too many things that were leaning on Overload like this. Like I was playing Unbound Elemental in one version. I was playing the new Wolf, which we'll get to shortly. Too many things just weren't what I was looking for. So maybe with the correct balance, this still ends up being good in that deck. One thing that's worth noting: if you are playing this in the Quest, it doesn't work with the final result, the double cast, because the damage it deals is equal to unlocking, and the first one unlocks all your crystals, so the second one does nothing, right? So if you double cast this, if you're overloaded for 9, it does 9. The second one does 0 because you have no overloaded mana. That's an important thing to note in terms of that specific deck. But the fact that it is tradable, that is, as I mentioned with so many of these cards, tradable means you can put this, into a deck, and in a much wider variety of circumstances, you can, actually find some value for it. Because worst case scenario, it's like, all right, I pay 1, goes back into my deck, we'll find something else. There is, of course, the fact that you will redraw it potentially, especially in a longer game, and you do have to spend that 1, so there is like a little bit of a tax. You got to pay the trade tax. Stormwind does not come free. Access to their markets. But yeah, I think this is a card that got like a ton of attention initially. I'm less impressed and less scared of it, having played it a little bit and seen it a little bit during the theory crafting streams. But I do think it still has potential. Next up is Granite Forgeborn. This is clearly a card that is attempting to rip off the incredibly successful game Soulforge. Soulforge, in case you didn't know, is a game that I actually helped design. That was a digital card game that was the heroes of which were called the Forgeborn. Everyone was sort of it was this ice planet where the Forge kind of powered the whole world. Forgeborn were those who like drew their strength from the sort of the magical energies of the Forge. We went into open beta the day Hearthstone was announced, and then kind of faded into nothingness. But Granite Forgeborn, 4-cost, 4/5 elemental. Battlecry, reduce the cost of elementals in your hand and deck by 1. This card is like kind of nutty. Hand, okay. Deck, whoa. And it's kind of Yeti ability. The Yeti stats aren't good, right? Yeti stats have long since not been that good. But like, this can already be discounted by like a Kindling Elemental. You could play Kindling Elemental turn 1, coin this out on turn 2. And then all your stuff's discounted for the rest of the game. Maybe play another one, like everything's like, ooh, everything's free. This card just, it feels like this would have been like a legendary at some point, and it's a rare. I feel like Elemental Shaman was like already pretty good, and this feels like it's like, really good. It's kind of baffling to me like how powerful this card seems, which makes me kind of like step back and be like, okay, is this that good? Like, are there enough like good big elementals that you want to play this? I think the answer is yes. I think this is just like a really, really strong card, right? Like, there's no overload, there's no drawback. It's the drawback is that it's a 4-cost 4/5 with no like taunt or rush or whatever, and maybe that's enough, right? In the current world we live in, like if it doesn't have an impact the turn you play it, but it can have an impact the turn you play it. You could play this and then play a Kindling Elemental off of this, and then play a 2-drop off of that. It just feels like kind of wild, kind of powerful. So I feel like this is a card that already slots into an existing deck in the form of Elemental Shaman. Maybe because of Granite Forgeborn, you play that deck more minion focused and less spell focused. Although then you lose the value of like Primal Dungeoneer, which is a pretty important element of that. So I don't know. But this feels pretty crazy to me, and feels like it enables like just a lot of powerful mid-range and big elementals to be a lot more powerful than they have been. Next up, we have Spirit Alpha. 4-cost 2/5. After you play a card with Overload, summon a 2/3 Spirit Wolf with Taunt. So whenever you play an Overload card, you get a wolf off of Feral Spirits. This was one of the cards that I included in my Quest deck, which felt like it was a mistake. Because, yes, I had a ton of Overload cards, but what I wanted was to play more Overload cards and then more spells. So I could take advantage of the quest, get the quest completed, and then take advantage of the quest being completed. Maybe this is a card that you play in like a non-quest Overload aggro deck, in order to give you more value from your various overload cards. It costs 4 for a 2 power thing though, so it's maybe this is like mid-range-ish overload. I'm not sure. This card, it looks powerful on its face, right? Like it's like, okay, anytime you play it, wow, anytime you play an overload card, you get a 2/3, and you can like play this lightning bloom bolt boom 3/2/3s. Kind of a lot, right? Or like guidance, lightning bloom guidance, blah, whatever. Because you just get it's a lot, a very high value card, right? But I like the quest specifically feels like it's a better you have better payoffs elsewhere by actually just completing the quest as fast as possible than playing spells. So it feels like, okay, well, if you are playing an overload centric deck, where does this fit? And I don't know. I think that it may be that the nature of the quest being such a payoff for spells already makes you not want this in that deck, and maybe there isn't another home for it. It's kind of where my headspace is at right now. But the card does seem like it's extremely powerful, so I would not be surprised if like there was like a mid-range overload deck that wasn't spell quest focused that ended up deciding they wanted this card. Next up is Auction House Gavel. 2-cost 2/2 weapon. After hero attacks, reduce the cost of a Battlecry minion in your hand by 1. Definitely powerful with the sort of Battlecry combo-ish guy we saw. Another option for a Cage Match Custodian weapon. One thing that we have seen, Cage Match Custodian is one of the absolute central cards of a lot of different decks for Shaman. And this is, maybe a third weapon. Maybe you play, these are the things you play in addition to the Cage Match Custodian, or in addition to your other stuff. Like we've generally seen, okay, you often want to have like 3 weapons, right? Maybe you're a Battlecry deck and you play Gavels and then play one other, or whatnot. But yeah, being able to set up like more cheap stuff, more things in your curve, is very interesting. It is random, obviously, and doesn't necessarily like if you have like a lot of Battlecry stuff, a lot of elementals or whatever, it could set you into a sort of a weird space. But it's even just like potentially just like a tempo card, right? If you're playing a deck that's like largely elementals that are largely Battlecry, you play this and just like, okay, well, I just got -1 cost on a creature in my hand. Maybe you attack with this on turn 2 and it reduces the cost of the Forgeborn guy, who reduces the cost of everything else. So yeah, I think this is a card that's definitely pretty interesting. Obviously, it's literally named Auction House Gavel, goes with the auction guy or whatever. That was what he was, right? The Battlecry guy was an auction guy. I don't even remember exactly. But regardless, cost reduction is one of those things you always keep an eye on. Cost reduction is a hugely powerful thing, and this is cost reduction that can also give you tempo by allowing you to attack and kill minions. It is only a 2/2 weapon, so there's that can't kill like a Kolkar, but you're playing Shaman, right? You have access to stuff like Lightning Bolt and Serpent Shrine Portal and whatnot, which gives you more flexibility in terms of removing those sort of things and maybe enabling you to play this just sort of as a different form of tempo tool. And lastly, but certainly not least for Shaman, is Charged Call. 3-cost spell, discover a 1-cost minion and summon it. One big thing here, this is Discover. This is not a random, and it's upgraded for each overload card you played this game. So if you've played 7 overload cards, this is Discover an 8-cost minion and summon it. And the Discover part is huge. There's obviously like a bunch of random bad minions at each cost, but because it is Discover and not just summon a random, it is much less likely to put you in a situation where there's no good results. It is a nature spell, so you can potentially play this alongside Primal Dungeoneer. If you're playing, a deck with a bunch of overload, stuff there, which a lot of the nature spells naturally are. This was one of the cards that I played in the quest deck. Very powerful card to copy, right? You play a bunch of stuff. If you have played your 8 overload cards to get to the quest, you're now making 9 drops at least, maybe 10 drops with your charge calls, and you're making 2 of them because it doubles the cast. Just very, very powerful, right? I think this is a very powerful like game ender type card for those sort of decks. Maybe you're just looking to burn your opponent out. Maybe you don't want to bother with this at all. But it does feel like a way, especially against decks that have a lot of armor or life gain, to give you that extra oomph to be able to sort of overcome their survivability by just generating a bunch of powerful stuff. I almost missed this card in this review. I skipped over it going down the list, which is kind of appropriate because this is a card that I missed the opportunity to invest in this in my my quest deck during the theory crafting stream, and it was a card that I felt like I really wanted. So 1 cost, draw an overload card. a little weird. Like, you don't really care that much. Like, hey, I just drew a card from a deck. One cost like cycle and draw specifically an overload card. But if you care about specifically drawing, hey, I want to play 8 overload cards to get this online, that's pretty important, right? And also, once you actually have your quest completed with the overload quest, this draws you 2 overload cards. So you're drawing 2 overload cards that are then also doubled, and you just keep kind of chaining here. Also, can potentially be powerful as a resource generator alongside Note Taker, Diligent Note Taker into investment opportunity. Dig through, make sure that I'm actually completing my quest as quickly as I can. So I don't think this is a card that's likely to see very much play outside of the quest, but I think that it is kind of a cornerstone card for the quest, simply for the reasons that I described above. That it is so important to like get your quest online as quickly as possible, so that you can start doubling things, and also a great payoff card once you've actually doubled stuff. Also, maybe you live in a world where you're playing like a very small number of overload cards that somehow combine into something really powerful, and boom, because you are having a draw a specific thing, gives you the ability to effectively tutor those up. I mean, you could even imagine you're playing a deck that literally just has lightning blooms for overload cards, and you're like, all right, well, I want to guarantee that I get my lightning blooms each game, so I can play like an early primordial protector or whatever it is that I want to play. That's huge. Investment opportunity assures that I have access to those, every game much, much more frequently. Overall, I think that there's definitely some narrow applications with this, as well as, of course, the applications with the quest. Overall, really like the Shaman stuff in this set. I think the Battlecry dude, and the Forgeborn and the quest are kind of what stand out to me as the cards that are most likely to make a really big impact. Either as like competitive high value, like tempo type cards like the Forgeborn, or just things that generate their entirely new archetypes, like mentioned the Battlecry guy. Could also just go into elementals as well, or the quest, which clearly is just like, hey, this is what my deck is about. I'm trying to play a bunch of overload cards, and then boom, fireworks, go crazy with all my spells. So a lot of exciting stuff to explore, and I am looking forward to doing it. Next up, we have Warlock. And our first card here is Demonic Assault, a 4-cost fell spell. I haven't had to say that since Demon Hunter. Deal 3 damage, summon 2 1/3 Voidwalkers with Taunt. This is like kind of like an implosion-ish card, right? It's Implosion that always deals 3, and instead of creating 1/1s, makes Voidwalkers. And Implosion, in its time, was actually a very, very effective card. And I think in like a zoo style deck, this is actually likely to be pretty good. Direct damage is kind of at a premium. You don't have very much access to direct damage because this can actually hit your opponent's face. It could be a removal, it could be like a tempo play, and like it gives you 2 relatively durable minions. Them being Voidwalkers, they're demons, so if you have things that care about them being demons, is pretty effective, right? So, like my initial, when I first looked at this card, I'm like, oh, it doesn't seem that good. But then, like as I sort of pieced all of the elements of it together, I was like, you know what? Maybe this is actually a pretty solid card. I don't know if a deck is going to be good that wants this card, but I feel like if there is a zoo style deck, this is likely to be a pretty solid card in it, because it does a lot of things that you want. Can give you tempo, board control by killing their minion and putting some minions into play for you. Can be a finisher. It's basically like a flanking strike, but instead of a wolf, it gives you Voidwalkers. And you'd probably rather have Voidwalkers than a wolf if you are playing a zoo deck. So I think if there is a zoo deck in the metagame, this is likely to be a core component of it. Next up, we have Touch of the Nathrezim. Deal 2 damage to a minion. If it dies, restore 4 health to your hero. I think this card is very, very solid. Being able to gain life is very important for a lot of Warlock archetypes. Any kind of controlling Warlock deck loves this. Be able to life tap or backfire, a ton of things to use your life total as a resource. And obviously with the quest, which we will get to shortly, being able to continue to sustain your life total as you're damaging yourself is valuable. Just 1-cost deal 2, right? Like if you look at like the cheap spells that Warlock has typically had access to, stuff like Mortal Coil. Mortal Coil doesn't kill that much. Obviously drawing a card is sometimes better than restoring 4 health, but a lot of the time you would rather gain 4 than draw a card in like a controlling Warlock deck when you're playing against an aggressive deck, because you have a lot of cards and not that much health. So I think this card is just fantastic. It's also a shadow spell, which means it works with the Tamsin Roan. So you can potentially like multicast. It's a 1-cost shadow spell, so be able to like cast this. You could even like kill something that's like 4 health and gain the 4 life, or kill two things and gain this life. So I think this is a super, super, super solid card that will see a lot of play in controlling Warlock. Next up, we have Bloodbound Imp. 2-cost 2/5 demon. Whenever this attacks, deal 2 damage to your hero. There's a few applications. I think this is potentially just a good zoo card. Just a 2/5 for 2. Obviously, damaging yourself when you attack, a drawback against aggressive matchups, but not necessarily a huge deal when you are doing big chunks of damage. It also has synergy with the quest. The quest wants you to take damage in your own turn. This could potentially allow you to progress your quest without having to spend mana every turn to do so. You just get to keep getting these incremental hits, and once you do complete the quest, can just be used to potentially kill your opponent. So I think this has a broad range of applications. You could potentially play like a bunch of different types of quest luck, right? And we'll get to that with the quest, but I feel like there's kind of decks that can just race to the quest, and this is one of the cards that I think, in the kind of like aggro control style with the quest can be very, very powerful because of it's both pressure and the pace at which it gets you to the quest. So we have Dark Alley Pact. 4-cost shadow spell. Summon a fiend with stats equal to your hand size. So pretty clearly a like handlock-ish card. This is kind of Mountain Giant, right? It used to be that you had Mountain Giant. It's like, okay, if I have 5 mana, I play a 8/8 for 5. It's like, well, now if you have 4 mana, you play an 8/8, and if you have 4 mana and 8 cards in hand, play a Mountain Giant. You have, which is basically what it was before. If you had 8 cards in hand and 4 mana, you could play a Mountain Giant. But you can also play a 7/7 or a 6/6 or a 5/5. So you can play a 9/9. Definitely, clearly going in the handlock direction. And there's a number of other cards that potentially support like a handlock direction as well. So clearly one of the sort of archetypes that's being supported in this set. And it is a shadow spell. You can use this with Tamsin Roan. You can play Dark Alley Pact, for 7 mana. Play it twice alongside Tamsin, and that's pretty powerful. So I do expect this card to be if there is a handlock deck, right? This is one of the reasons why. Speaking of handlock, next up is Antheron. A 6-cost 8/6 demon. Costs 1 if your hand is full. It's a pretty interesting card. Obviously, like if you're playing a deck that's looking to burn through, draw as many cards as possible, this can get down really, really quickly. I don't know that this is actually a good card exactly, because lots of times you don't have a full hand. It doesn't have taunt, it doesn't have any immediate impact on the board, but it is a 1-cost 8/6 when it actually happens. And being able to like play this into the make a fiend equal to your hand size, or like this into other just powerful cheap things can be huge tempo swings. And that can be really powerful in the right matchups. It's not like the sort of card that's like, oh, this is like absolutely game changing. It transforms your ability to do things. It's just a powerful tempo play in the right circumstances. And like frankly, like if you backfire early, you can play this guy super early, right? Like if you backfire turn 3, you can play this guy turn 4. And that's kind of crazy. Like on the if you are even if you're not in the coin, if you tap turn 1, backfire turn 2, you can just tap turn 2, backfire turn 3, you can play this on turn 4, and that's wild, right? Like that's it's in standard, but it's a wild thing you can do. But yeah, obviously it's very situational. But if you build your deck focused on filling up your hand, having a big hand, doing that sort of thing, I think this card can be pretty powerful. Next up is Shady Bartender. I like this card as a tradable card a lot. A 5-cost 4/4 tradable. Battlecry, give your demons +2/+2. One of the big things with cards like this, they're really bad if you don't have demons, right? It's really, really bad if you have no minions, if your board's getting wiped. But yeah, I mean, this follows up the demonic blast or whatever that was pretty well. If you're playing just a zoo style deck, like, okay, great, I play a bunch of aggressive demons, and then if I have demons, if my demons don't get killed, boom, Shady Bartender, they'll get +2/+2, I smash you. If they do get killed, go this back of my deck, I'll go find some more demons. So I think this card is just good. Like I think that this is a card that I love that it has tradable. I think that it's one of the perfect cards for tradable, because any card like this that's like, hey, I care a lot about your board state, can be really rough to play, because that sort of board state can get disrupted very easily. But when you have the right board state, this is a very, very powerful card. One of the interesting things, Warlock already has so much ability to refill your hand, draw through your deck, that this gives you just that additional level of velocity going through your deck and trying to find other stuff. Obviously, again, tradable is not cycling. You're not getting rid of it. You're putting it back into your deck, so it's not like it's thinning your deck or anything like that. But being able to ensure that you're able to have like a smoother curve with tradable, thanks to this, and have a kind of curved topper if your board does survive, makes this, I think, a pretty powerful card in Zoo. Next up, we have Karen. 6 cost, entitled customer. Battlecry, deal damage equal to your hand size to all other minions. This is very much a handlock payoff, obviously. Handlock cares a lot, about being able to ensure the board is clear, and having a payoff of blow up all your stuff when you've just been drawing a bunch of cards. It's clearly just a very, very, very powerful card, right? I don't know that there's necessarily even that much more to say. One of the interesting things you can actually, you can try, obviously you can just be like, hey, I'm blowing everything up. I have a huge hand blowing everything up. You can also, I have a bunch of 7/7s and 8/8s, and I play some cards to play my entitled customer to do 4 or 5 to all your guys. He's trying to get rid of me. Karen's trying to call the cops on me. No cell phone recording here. But yeah, so you can use this flexibly depending on your own board state, right? You can use it just as, hey, I'm going to wipe the board, or you can use it as, hey, I'm going to wipe your board because my dudes are huge. And if you're playing stuff like Anatherin and the Summon a Fiend based on your hand size, good chance you're going to have some huge stuff. So this is, I think this is a card that can both reward you for building your deck in a particular way, and also reward you for smart gameplay of managing your hand size relative to your minions and your opponent's minions. And here we have the quest, the Warlock quest, the Demon Seed. Questline is to take 6 damage your turn. The reward is Lifesteal, deal 3 to the enemy hero. Next is take 7 damage in your turn. Then is deal 3 to the enemy hero, Lifesteal. The next is take 8 in your turns. The reward is Blightborn Tamsin. And she is a 5-cost 7/7 Battlecry for the rest of the game. Damage you take on your turn, damage your opponent instead. So, there are a few ways, as I was mentioning before, that I feel like this quest can be used. One is, you're playing this in a empty deck Warlock style deck. And that rather than, looking to empty out your deck, maybe refill it with Rustwicks and beat your opponent with Niru or whatever, you're just killing them with your fatigue. You're just looking to tap and backfire your way into completing your quest and then getting to fatigue. And then once you're there, you're like, all right, well, I'm just going to keep life tapping and playing things that damage me on my turn, and you take all that damage. This is the Warlock, normally Warlock goes to fatigue, their hero power is useless. Now their hero power is blow you up, because you get the tap plus the damage to them. Very, very powerful, very difficult for a lot of decks to beat in a long game. The other direction, I think, is the basically aggro suicide quest, right? That I'm looking to use Flame Imps and that 2/5 that I take damage when it attacks, and just trigger my quest as fast as possible. And then use those things and, the quest and life taps and backfires and everything to blow them up. So I think it's a very, very interesting quest that has a lot of cool decisions surrounding how you build toward it. It is obviously a quest that is potentially vulnerable to getting burned out, because your whole goal is to damage yourself. Obviously, you have a variety of ways to gain life back, including the quest rewards of lifesteal damage to the opposing hero. But I think I played against Tice in one game where he played out a bunch of stuff, damaging himself, and I just played a Brukan and lightning bolted him, and he couldn't kill my Brukan immediately, and then he just died the next turn because he dealt so much damage to himself. Well, I think that this quest is likely to be extremely difficult for a lot of slower controlling decks to beat. I think it's also likely to be pretty vulnerable to aggressive decks because of the nature of the sort of cards you're looking to play in it. But at the same time, finding the balance of hey, how much self heal do I want to play? you're playing a bunch of heal as instead of a bunch of like ways to accelerate, you're getting your quest faster. It kind of tips the scales toward I'm better against aggro, but worse against, have less sort of inevitability against these control type decks. So I think it's actually a very interesting quest to try and like figure out how to maximize. But it's very scary, right? Like it is a sort of quest that like when it gets online, it is difficult to beat because they just have so many ways of transferring damage to you, especially if they're like the sort of fatigue version. It's like, all right, I'm in fatigue. I will play backfire, and you take that 3, and then you take the like 5, 6, and 7 from my fatigue, and you're dead. So very cool quest, very interesting, and I think there's a variety of ways to build it, and I'm curious to see how people decide to try and maximize it. Next up, we have Dreaded Mount. 3-cost spell, give a minion +1/+1 when it dies, summon an endless Dreadsteed. So this is probably the coolest of the mount cards, because it actually just gives you a Dreadsteed. Dreadsteed, for those who don't know, is a 4-cost 1/1 that when it dies, it comes back to life. Period. Although it used to be it came back to life, now it comes back at the end of the turn. You can't like repeatedly sacrifice it. It broke the game with Defile, because it would just keep killing the Dreadsteed, and you'd be locked forever. They had to change it so that it came back at the end of the turn. But still, it's like, okay, now you get an endless minion. It's neat. I don't know that it's actually any good, because a 1/1 doesn't really get that much done. Maybe you have like endless, maybe you have like endless ways to sacrifice things or whatever. But I think it's probably just like too slow and too low impact to really be that powerful. But it's cool. It's, I'm sure people will try and figure out ways to abuse having a bunch of Dreadsteed. And lastly, we have Ruined Mithril Rod, a 3-cost weapon. After you draw 4 cards, reduce the cost of cards in your hand by 1. So it's another handlock-ish card, I feel like. You're looking to draw a bunch of cards, and you're looking to have a big hand, so you're going to get a lot of cost reduction from these. I think this is likely to be a pretty powerful card in those sort of decks. Getting cost reduction on a handful of stuff can be really, really powerful. That said, like, spending 3 to not do anything on the board can be pretty dangerous for that sort of deck. Like, you generally don't have a lot of wiggle room with like a handlock style deck with how you spend your mana in a lot of aggressive matchups. And those are also frequently the matchups where you care most about stuff like cost reduction. So it's possible this is just like too slow to be effective even in those decks. I do feel like if it does have a home, it's going to be in handlock style deck. So it depends sort of on the metagame. If the metagame is like fast, then maybe you don't really care about having the Ruined Mithril Rod in your deck because you can't afford to spend the mana on it on the your early turns. But if it's like a slower and like more sort of like, hey, I'm just trying to power out this specific combination of things, then maybe this ends up being a card that you want to include in your deck. Overall, I think Warlock has some cool options. I think there's some options for Zoo, which we haven't really seen make much of resurgence in a while. I think the Bartender and the sort of Voidwalker Plosion card are both pretty powerful options for Zoo, as well as the 2/5. The Quest has to be like the most sort of exciting of the Warlock cards. Gives you a kind of inevitable win condition in any kind of slower matchup. And I do think has a number of different interesting ways that you can maneuver it. And then, of course, Handlock kind of making a return back to the days of old school Hearthstone. Curious to see which of those kind of rises in prominence as among the top Warlock decks. And, if they can really survive the onslaught of the burn and aggro decks that are often the Warlock's demise. All right, next up we have Warrior, our final class. And we will start with Cowardly Grunt. 6-cost, 6/2. With Death Rattle, summon a minion from your deck. So, there are some like big Warrior type decks that actually see a medium amount of play. They're pretty unpopular, but or like commencement decks. And this is kind of a additional copy of commencement type card, right? You get yourself a 6/2. When it dies, you can put one of your giant monsters into play. It's basically a recruit, right? Obviously, in any sort of normal deck, right? This is a terrible card, right? If you're playing like any kind of mid-range deck, any kind of aggro deck, you have a 6/2 6-drop that dies and gives you a random minion from your deck. If your deck is only full of like 8, 9, and 10 drops or whatever, then maybe this is good, right? Maybe this is actually something which can help accelerate you into those gigantic monsters. One of the awkward things with this card in a lot of the sort of versions of Big Warrior is that like they play stuff like Troublemaker or the 9/9 sort of Ragnarocious Dragon. And a lot of the power of those is that they have an effect immediately when they come into play. And if you play a Cowardly Grunt and your opponent like kills it in their turn, and they can kill your thing before it gets its like Battle Cry or End of Turn or whatever type effect off, then you lose a ton of the value from that. So it might sort of switch around the sort of style of things you actually want to play in that sort of Big Warrior deck. Or you could just Cowardly Grunt into another Cowardly Grunt, and then it's like, okay, well, you didn't really get much out of it at all. Obviously, that one would now chain you, but it at least takes a whole another turn before it has an effect. And obviously, super vulnerable to any kind of silence effect. And there are more silence effects that are likely to actually show up if there are any decks that are remotely vulnerable to silence because of the tradable silence minion and the priest silence, etc. So I think this card is like, yes, it can have like narrow applications in a fairly narrow archetype, but it's unlikely to be kind of like the jolt in the arm that archetype needs to really become significantly more popular. Next up, we have Cargo Guard. 3 cost 2/4 pirate. At the end of your turn, gain 3 armor. This card's just great. This card, it's a like Shield Maiden, Shield Buddy. I don't know. This is an incredibly strong card against any kind of aggressive deck. It's a pirate, but it's not like an aggressive pirate. It's like a mid-range pirate, right? Because you want to be able to survive. And this card I think is perfect basically with the quest. We'll get to the quest in a little bit, but the quest cares about pirates. And the quest gives you kind of a longer term game plan than Pirate Warrior typically has. Pirate Warrior historically has generally been like, hey, I got a bunch of weapons, I play a bunch of pirates, they beat you up. But that's not really what this does. That's not really what the sort of pirate related quest does in this set. And this guy I think is kind of a perfect card for it because it's a relatively efficient, it's not a good body, right? 2/4, right? It's not giving you like power on the board. Like you're not threatening to beat someone up with it. But like it doesn't get like massacred by like like lower cost minions. It has at least 2 attacks, so like it's not gonna just get value traded by cheap things. And get you 3 armor, 4 health. That gets you 3 armor. Like your opponent, if you're playing an aggressive deck, has to spend a lot. Like they effectively spend 4 damage killing this and gain you 3 armor, so it took 7 damage. It absorbed effectively 7 damage. That's pretty amazing for a 3 cost minion, right? And if they don't kill it, you just keep gaining armor every single turn. So I think this card is fantastic. It's not the sort of Pirate Warrior card that we're used to historically. This isn't like patches coming in and hitting you in the face. This is patches coming in and trading with your guy. And much more effective at playing a longer game, which is what the sort of Pirate Warrior in this set is looking to do. Next up, we have Remote Controlled Golem, a 4 cost 3/6. After this takes damage, shuffle 2 Golem parts in your deck. When drawn, summon a 2/1 mech. Kind of a weird card. This doesn't really fit into any of the themes going on in the set. It is worth noting that one of the themes that had existed in previous sets was sort of the big top sort of menagerie-ish theme with like Ringmaster and the Ringmaster's Baton. There weren't that many great mechs for that. That weren't like there was like Scrap Golem and then like Bumper Car and like the Dirigible. And that was it, right? There wasn't really like a great things to necessarily curve into with the Baton. I guess Ironclad was another one of them. But this one, maybe this ends up being a more appealing mech for those. A 3/6 for 4 is like a reasonable stat line, especially if it's getting like buffs from Baton or whatever. Other than that, I don't really see the seeing play. It doesn't, like if you're looking to be a like aggressive deck, a 3/6 isn't really what you're into. It doesn't have any immediate effect. I think you have to care that it's a mech in order to want to put this into your deck. Like getting sometime down the line a 2/1 mech when it takes damage, not that exciting either. But I do think that maybe a Ringmaster Baton deck, that could be where this finds a home. And here we have the quest. This is what I was talking about. Raid the docks. The quest is to play 3 pirates. The reward is draw a weapon. So pirates, they care about weapons. Not like a, hey, we're hacking you with our weapons, we're buffing all our guys kind of deck. There's not that many warrior weapons that you really have access to play right now that are particularly appealing. I played this deck. This is the first deck that I actually played. on the theory crafting stream, and I actually didn't even know the reward when I played it. I literally went in blind. Speaking of blind, what is this for like ants? This is a create a distraction. How can you create a distraction if it's that small? How can you secure that? Are these supplies for ants? What's going on? The next tier, you draw your weapon, then you play 2 more pirates. You deal 2 damage to a random enemy twice, and then you secure the supplies. You get Captain Rikara. Captain Rikara comes in. She summons the Juggernaut, and the Juggernaut, oh, I have turned into a giant ship. So the Juggernaut is a dormant minion. It is a dormant thing, can't be killed, permanent, doesn't go away. And every turn, summon a pirate, equip a warrior weapon, fire 2 cannons that deal 2 damage. So as I was saying, with regard to the cargo guard, the dock guy or whatever that was giving you armor every turn, it's kind of a mid-range deck, right? This wants you to play a kind of longer game, right? It's not looking to just end the game immediately. You're not looking to just hack your opponent into bits and pieces. It is looking to play like a mid-range-ish game that ultimately generates this, which generates value, but it's value that's putting on pressure. It's a proactive mid-range plan that gives you a way to like win a like value game against a lot of decks. One of the problems that warrior decks typically have when they're playing some sort of aggressive or mid-range style of deck, they just run out of stuff, right? They just end up running out of resources because they have a hero power that just gains armor, which isn't good against control. And, they have weapons or removal spells that just kind of don't do enough when you get to that stage of the game. And the Juggernaut means you will never, ever, ever run out of stuff. You just keep summoning pirates, you keep equipping weapons, and you keep firing your cannons. And it's cool. It's a lot of fun. Like I said, this was the first deck that I actually tried building during the theory crafting streams. And the Juggernaut is sailing away into the distance. So yeah, this was a super fun quest. I'm really looking forward to playing this. Finding the sort of right balance of pirates and what you do want to play, what you don't want to play, what weapon you want to play because of Raid the Docks, how you actually put this together, I think is actually a pretty interesting deck building challenge. Like for instance, do you play like the weapon that I chose to play? I played 2 copies of Reaper Scythe and then 1 copy of Whetstone Hatchet, which I think the Whetstone Hatchet wasn't very useful, but I had the Reaper Scythes and then I had like, like I said, initially I built my deck without even knowing what the Juggernaut did. So I had some things that didn't necessarily make a ton of sense with what I was doing. I had like whatever the poison was, Nitro Boost, which if I'm playing more of like a mid-range game, doesn't necessarily make as much sense as just trying to like blow them up. I feel like maybe you play some sort of different stuff. I don't know, but like for instance, I feel like playing. I was playing the Anchorman, and I was like, you know what? I want to cut Anchorman from my deck because there was like my thing that drew a pirate. When it drew my Anchorman, I couldn't then play 2 pirates in 1 turn to advance my quest. And because I have the Juggernaut, I need resource generation less than the average warrior deck, which frequently really wants resource generation, right? As soon as I have my 7 pirates, I'm getting a pirate every single turn. I'm getting a new weapon every single turn. I'm never out of weapons to swing. I'm never out of pirates. And that doesn't mean you don't care about any other resources, but it's just a very interesting sort of exercise in deck building as to what's important when this is something you have access to ultimately at some point in every single game. So overall, I love this. This is one of my favorite cards in the set, and I'm definitely looking forward to experimenting with it because it's super fun. Next up, we have Lothar. Not the former Hearthstone caster who now casts and plays Valorant, but 7 cost 7/7. At the end of your turn, attack a random enemy minion. If it dies, gain +3/+3. This is kind of interesting. It's sort of rush, but you don't get to choose. So if they have like a big thing, maybe he just like runs into it and gets himself killed. I feel like there's a lot of good high-end things. And there's also a lot of stuff that this attack into could be pretty bad, like Venomous Scorpid. Lothar just like, he runs into the desert and steps on a scorpion and dies! I almost knocked over the tavern. I lost my hand! Oh god! But no, I feel like this is meh. Not super impressive to me. I feel like there's probably better options, again, for high-end minions. I don't know that, like, there's not, like, obviously if you're in, like, a like mid-range matchup where you're a little bit ahead and your opponent has nothing bigger than him, this can just snowball that advantage. But if you are like behind a larger minion, your opponent has, again, something like a a Scorpid, which is very common. You could obviously always like potentially like hack a Scorpid with a weapon. It's very obviously very common in Warrior. But if you are ahead, this guy can really snowball an advantage very quickly. So I'm certainly not dismissing this, but this is not something that I am super excited about, and I don't really know exactly where I would want it in any kind of Warrior deck right now. Next up we have Stormwind Freebooter, 3-cost 3/3 pirate, so relevant for the quest. Battlecry, give your hero +2 attack this turn. So, like I said, very relevant for the quest. Be able to play this and potentially attack and kill a minion, or attack and assist in killing a minion with a smaller minion that you played potentially on turn 2. It's just a solid card, right? Like giving your hero, plus attack can either be just direct damage to your opponent or board control. More valuable as board control, I think. But yeah, overall, just I think a good card. Not like an amazing card. You compare it to like a SI7 agent, which is a card that doesn't actually see that much play these days. And this is sort of like an SI7 agent that doesn't need combo, but you take damage, right? I think that there's obviously like a trade-off there. More consistently able to do its thing, but you can't hit things behind taunts, and you can't avoid the damage that you take. But you're a warrior, so tank it up. Next up, we have Heavy Plate. 3-cost spell, tradable, gain 8 armor. So this is kind of an interesting card because one of the things that when I'm playing like a mid-range warrior deck, oftentimes I'm like, okay, I'm a warrior. I want to have some degree of survivability, but there's no more like shield block, or like I don't want to play something which is like heavily dedicated to keeping me alive against aggressive decks. This having tradable means that this is a card that you could play in your deck in a metagame where there's some range of aggressive decks, but also some control decks. And you're like, well, I want to have a way that I can get out of range of the Face Hunter, right? There are obviously a lot of tools that Warrior has, like the Cargo Guard and just your hero power, or whatever. But this is super efficient, right? 8 armor for 3 mana is a lot. Makes it pretty difficult for them to add up to quite enough to kill you in time for you to get other stuff online. And in the matchups where it's bad, send it back in the deck, right? And I think that this sort of thing is especially appealing in a deck like the Pirate Quest Warrior, where you have, against control decks, you have this kind of inevitability win condition of your dormant thing that continues to generate value every turn. And then you're like, okay, well, I need to have something that can help stabilize against these aggressive decks potentially, but I want to make sure that I have enough pirates to get to my my ultimate win condition in those matchups too, because getting additional stuff every turn is valuable there as well. So you have this. You can play heavy armor in your deck, heavy plate in your deck rather, and when you need it, go ahead, gain some armor. If you're playing in a matchup where it's bad, or you're just in a situation where you don't need the additional survivability, it's just like it's kind of like a shield block that's more powerful up front. You can still cycle it, sort of. You actually cycle cheaper in the matchups where it's bad. So like when you compare it to shield block, it's worse when you cast it than shield block because you're not getting the card. But in the matchups where you don't really care about the armor, you can get rid of this for 1 mana instead of 3. So I think this is actually a very interesting card. I don't think this is going to be like omnipresent. It's certainly not like a card that goes into basically every single warrior deck like Shield Block, or at least every warrior deck that isn't ultra aggro. But I do think that it has more applications than I think most people have really accounted for. Next up is Shiver Their Timbers. I didn't know you could shiver other people's timbers. I thought you just shivered me timbers. I don't really know what that means, I guess, but 1 cost, deal 2 to a minion. If you control a pirate, deal 5 instead. As I was mentioning with the sort of pirate quest stuff going on in this set, I feel like the pirate stuff here is very mid-rangey, and having a ultra-efficient removal spell, 1 cost for 5 damage to a minion, is very powerful for that sort of mid-range plan. Being able to take out like a trampling rhino, a Felmaw that obviously hit your face and didn't trade into a minion, all kinds of stuff. Boom, 5 damage, get it out of here. So I think it's just super efficient, right? This is like Pirate Slam. It's not Shield Slam. It's Pirate Slam. Get them for 5. Kind of like Shield Block, Shield Slam. You pirate into Shiver Their Timbers. But yeah, I think this card's great. I think this will see tons of play in the pirate decks. obviously won't see play outside of the pirate decks, but I think it's a very, very good, very, very good card for them. And last, but certainly not least, the Harbor Scamp. 2-cost, 2/2 pirate, Battlecry, draw a pirate. Fantastic for the quest, clearly. If you're, you're looking to play some pirates, play some more pirates. Pirate that draws a pirate, so this is 2 pirates in 1. Yo, dog, I heard you like pirates, so you put pirates in your pirates. Not much more to say. This is just like a very efficient resource generator. Like if you're playing a deck that has a bunch of pirates, this is better than like a loot hoarder or whatever, because you just get it right away. It's a 2/2. Just absolutely like core role playing card. Not the sort of thing that's like, oh, this is broken, whatever, but just a solid fundamental tool in those pirate decks. So that's it for Warrior. I do think the most exciting stuff in Warrior is clearly the pirate stuff. There is, some other options and some, I think some interesting tools with, like I was saying, heavy plate. I do think heavy plate is probably better than most people are giving credit for. But I do think the most interesting stuff going on is the quest. I think that the pirate stuff with the quest is just super cool, super fun. I do think that there's elements, like I think that Cargo Guard, for instance, Cargo Guard is just a card you could play in like a Warrior deck, right? Like that could go into, like if you're in a metagame where like, Face Hunter's popular, play that in your Rush Warrior deck, right? Play that in your Rush Warrior deck, make them kill it, gain a bunch of armor. I think Cargo Guard is probably the best Warrior card in the set overall. I think the quest is like, obviously like archetype defining, but I think Cargo Guard is the one that has the most potential to see play across a wide variety of decks. And Harbor Scamp 2, I think, is actually like, this is a card that you could play this in Rush Warrior. You could draw yourself your Stonewall Anchorman. You could draw your Sword Eater. Like this can just be a workhorse value card in a wide variety of Warrior decks as well. So between those two, maybe this is, you have just more of a pirate, pirate core in those sort of decks. You play the Cargo Guard as well. So I think this is another one that's likely to see a ton of play and drawing a lot of Cargo Guards too. So overall, excited for Warrior. I really like mid-range type decks. Anyone who's followed me for a while knows that, and the quest is a mid-range person's dream, along with the fact that it creates a lot of cool random stuff, and I'm always a fan of that too. So let's go raid those dogs.